Hi, and welcome to today's presentation on the Facility Management Handover Equipment Maintenance Project here at the Building Smart International. Today's topic is an overview of the project and to find out how you can sponsor and participate in the project. My name's Bill East. I'm the technical team chair. And if you want more information, you can find it through our project website, which is at buildingsmart.org under standards, and then the building room, and then you'll find us FM Handover. When you see these operations and maintenance manuals in a facility management office, let me ask you what comes to mind when you think about these books. Here's some of the things that come to my mind. They're expensive. In fact, just the cost of reproducing all of the O&M manuals that appeared in this facility management library cost $150,000, just the reproduction cost to make the books. They're often incomplete. The information is old as soon as it's delivered because maybe there have been changes in the operations and maintenance of the building and parts have been swapped out. The important things probably are torn out of the books and put under the seats of the maintenance workers. One of my favorite stories is that information from these books was taken by a fire marshal and put above door number 1 so that in their 6-month fire inspection of the student center at Carnegie Mellon University, they could go every time and find the books above them. The trouble is when a different fire marshal came, he didn't know which door was door number 1. So he had no idea where the documentation was. Obviously, it's wasteful. The information is often unavailable. In fact, if you work at an office in the Pacific Northwest, there's actually a librarian there that requires you to check in and check out documents. That's the only way they've found to attempt to maintain control over the quality and the content of these documents. So there's limited access as well. But of course, during design and construction, the production of that essentially worthless information is just seen as another deliverable. But people have thought that maybe something could be done for quite some time. The oldest citation I could find was from 1983, where 2 generations of executives from companies ago got together in a nice little laboratory called Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And they had a big conclave and they said, well, what's going to happen when personal computers show up? You know, this is before the internet, right? Just computers. What's going to happen when computers show up in the construction trailer? And they said, well, we could finally do something about all this data that's being lost. But they didn't fail to see that they had it within their power to actually do something about it at the time. When my buddy here, Lyle, at Fort Lewis, Washington, decided to join the project, we did a little pilot with him, and his boss said it was amazing because on the little pilot project we did at his office, we were able to demonstrate before they could move in, they could have the complete set of operations and maintenance manuals, unlike the current process, which is you don't get the as-built and the operations data until well after you've moved in, and sometimes years. At the same time, I began to investigate the problem with Lyle and his boxes. There was a similar study going on at Carnegie Mellon University to look at what's the effect of having this information in an unusable format. And they found that essentially every worker could get a free extra day of productivity per week if they had access to correct information. It's a pretty staggering figure that each maintenance worker could get 1 more workday out of their work week without having to pay them anything more, just by providing the proper information about what was in the building, what had to be fixed, how to fix it, and where the spare parts were located. Building Smart International has tried to do something about this for some time. In 2009, Building Smart created the basic FM handover view based on IFC 2X3. In the US, that became the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange and was published as a US specification. I'll have a slideshow on this that will lay it out a little bit more clearly about the relationship between building smart activities and activities in the US. But Building Smart has been engaged in this process since 2009, trying to fix it. In fact, while I was employed by the Army Corps of Engineers, my team and I tested over 30 different commercial and open source software products directly aimed at producing during design, consuming design data, updating the data during construction, and passing it on to facility management software. Half of the software on this list is facility management software. And they have a little secret in the facility management or asset management software. It's very clear that you need a managed process to properly operate facilities, especially complex facilities. The trouble is, in order to get to the place where you know what you have to manage, you have to have an accurate list of equipment that's in the building and how to maintain it and where the parts are located. That typically takes man years to type in, even on a reasonably sized building. Somebody, in fact, at Lyle's office has a full-time job of typing in pump 5 is in room 3, and that's their full-time job, is loading data from as-built information or updated information they receive on buildings. So everybody says, let's wait 5 years and then everything will be better. Well, that's kind of what we thought as soon as we had software that began to be able to implement this standard or US-based specification. And after about 5 years, I went around and took some pictures. And here's what I found. Unlike the picture of Lyle, people were now getting the data. Some of the people were now getting the data in electronic format. So in the left-hand picture, you can see there's 2 shoe boxes on the left-hand side of the left-hand picture. The upper left-hand corner of that shoebox is the as-built building information repository. I call this shoebox formatted digital twin. It's still that way. And it's even worse because when I went to the office and asked them where it was, they said they didn't know because the guy that was in charge of it retired. So in a way, it's actually better to have the information in all of the boxes in the boiler room because at least somebody knows where it is because they've physically seen it. Now, the picture on the right was taken at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Facility Management Office, and it clearly shows a fan coil unit with 3 separate stickers on it, each representing 3 different contractual or organizational requirements, each having a database behind it that resulted in the generation of these stickers, and somehow someone managed and paid for all of those different things when it's just the one device. So apparently there's 3 different kinds of ground truth about the number and location of fan coil units, even at the facility management office of the arguably one of the most premier engineering organizations in the United States, if not the world. So this is how it is at MIT. When I took these problems to a construction company executive in Chicago, they simply said, well, they said 2 things. The first thing they said is the statement here: I'm getting paid for this. Why would I want to improve my efficiency? Because it would decrease my profit. So that's the first thing they said, completely really discounting any value that might be made by giving the owner a better product, right? Just focusing on the profits. And then when I said, you know, you have full-time employees whose job it is to type in and just recreate and transcribe stuff from paper documents into operations and maintenance. And they said, well, you know, we're paying them, we have to give them something to do. And all I can say, it's no wonder people don't want to work for an organization like that. If you want to retain people that are used to technology in their back pocket, you can't sit them down and have them do pump 5 in room 3 as a job. It'll drive them nuts and they'll go find a different job. So we waited a few years after publication of Kobe, and all of those 30 or so software companies. And we thought, well, things would change. And obviously they did not. A few years later, I waited and got together an international team. And our goal was to try and find out what went wrong with COBie. And so we published an initial version of this lessons learned report. And we found three major kind of findings. The first one was there was an inconsistent application of the US specification, primarily because it was a US specification and not an international standard. The result was a scope creep where people thought, well, if we can use this data format for buildings, maybe we should be able to use it for everything because we don't have a solution to other problems right now. So there was a consistent misapplication that led to a misunderstanding of the process of capturing the information. The original 2000 specification, the draft concept that I published in 2007 said each party is responsible to capture the data that they create. So designers capture pump 5 is going to be in room 3. Subcontractors say, here is the manufacturer and the model number. That's the approved submittal for this pump. The installer identifies the installation date and the serial number for products that have serial numbers. When you get to commissioning, you have someone define the system order of operations for the equipment that was installed, and the operations and maintenance requirements are double checked. That should have come, by the way, from the subcontractor. And when you hand it over, you're not doing a job crawl to bust up ceiling tiles and insulation to get the data. And you're not having to have anyone do this transcription. In fact, you can automatically produce the majority of the information in operations and maintenance manuals if the proper procedure and integrated process for capturing data is accomplished. Well, nobody understood that. And so what ended up happening is they just did what everybody else does on every other project, is they hire a separate consultant, they wait till the end of the project, and they pay them to do the work. Compounding insult to injury was that no one recognized that there were objective measures to test the deliverable, regardless of when it was sent in. So even the deliverables where a third party was hired and the data was delivered much later after the person moved in, as is the traditional process, even in this situation, the data that was delivered was by and large incorrect because nobody took the time to check it, even though there were objective testing tools. So this is what went wrong with COBie. There was a scope creep, there was a misunderstanding of how it was to be done, and there was a misuse of the quality and lack of enforcement on the testing of deliverables. So what did we do when we made COBie almost 15 years ago? Well, we increased the cost of every project that has this, but didn't provide really much benefit at all. So that's kind of a sobering assessment of what has actually happened on this US national specification. If we were to start over, how might we do it differently? Well, the first thing we would say is that every engineered artifact has some designed purpose, and a good engineered artifact might have multiple purposes, like the room on the left. This multi-purpose room can be used for many different things, hence the name, right? It can be used for the basketball game, as you're seeing here. It can be used for physical education during school time. It can be used as a school play or for a school dance. Even for PTO meetings and parent-teacher meetings and so forth, and band concerts. You could use it for lots of different reasons. But if you use it for a reason it wasn't designed to be used for, then there's some unintended and unfortunate consequences. Take the picture on the right. If you begin to use a multi-purpose room as an emergency shelter, clearly it was not designed for that purpose. After a few days, the room is not going to smell too good. And after about a month, people are going to be mad. And why? Because what you provided them was not designed for that purpose. It's the same issue with the national specification developed in the US. It was designed for one thing and it began to be used for many other things. Initially, people were very happy that they had an option, but then they found out, hey, this doesn't really work very well. So what is the point of Building Smart updating its model view definition? Well, it's to really get to the pragmatic vision that we had intended, which is let's do what people need. Now, it got sort of sidetracked by we thought they needed all kinds of things, but it turns out they really didn't need too much. You need the make and model of the equipment. You need to know the serial number and the installation date. There's a minimum common denominator of data that's applicable on every building, regardless of its function. And in the process of creating that building, you also have a standards about and standard process. And these are not national standards in any way. These are conventions developed as a result of the legalities of the contracts. So different people select products. That's what you do as part of your contractual activity if you're a subcontractor. And that selection is done well after the design process. So if you see design software that has manufacturer and model number in the design software, that's a clear misunderstanding of the goals of this activity, right? Because the goal is not for the design team to put in the manufacturer and the model number, but for the subcontractor during the approved submittal process to capture the data then. So we're also going to focus on the non-geometric aspect. It's very clear the geometric aspect of building information modeling has been very successful for those firms that are interested in doing detailed coordination for purpose of prefabrication. This use case is well established and widely used. What we're talking about here is integrating the data that comes out of these models into the back office so that the non-geometric information collected by manufacturers and suppliers, commissioning agents and inspectors and quality assurance personnel, that information can be seamlessly integrated with whatever user interface you have, whether it's a database user interface or whether it's a graphical user interface with a 3D model. It doesn't really matter because either way, you have to have the back office data integrated. The other things we're going to do that were not in the original project when it rolled out starting in 2007 is we didn't have testing applications that were robust enough. We didn't have a good set of testing examples. So these are going to be done right away in phase 1 of this project. Phase 2, we're going to certify training providers and individuals against individual qualifications as well as their professional ability to apply this new standard. And finally, we're going to have local chapters work with us to develop the standard contract language that's recommended by those chapters for the proper implementation within the contractual context of each country. So the bottom line is we're going to really support what people need here and not try and boil the ocean. And what people need for maintenance of building equipment is really pretty straightforward. So here's the 3 phases of the project. Phase 1 is development phase. Phase 2 is software testing and verification. We're going to certify individuals, and the certification processes that already exist at Building Smart International will transition to support this new international standard. And in phase 3, which could parallel phase 2 in some way, chapters will begin to localize by language and also develop their additional requirements for training and education for their local supply chains. So I told you before that we were going to have a timeline that showed sort of how all of this fits together. So I started in 2007 with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and did the first couple of versions of COBE. At version 2.26, this was transitioned to Building Smart International as an IFC 2x3 model view definition. Just recently, we submitted a proposal to Building Smart International to update this original specification and to create a strategy to handle any kind of delivery of non-geometric information through the back office integration. And we're going to start with equipment maintenance to begin with. As soon as this basic FM handover MVD was published, a slightly updated version of COBie began to be implemented and tested within a variety of different software systems through something that I called the COBie Challenge. That eventually became the basis for national adoptions of the US specification, notably COBie in the UK, and it's bent towards applications for infrastructure and applications for non-equipment assets, which were out of scope from the original specification, as well as being implemented as the so-called US National BIM standard by an organization that's not really authorized. It's not the American National Standards Institute or the American Testing Materials Testing Organization, the two organizations responsible for standards in the US. But nonetheless, it was published, and this COBie 2.4 is what people typically think of when they talk about the COBie specification today. As we proceed with the Building Smart International standard for equipment maintenance, eventually these national adopters of national standards, we hope that they will transition to the international specification. And while that's pretty clear that that would eventually happen in the UK, maybe not so obvious in the US, despite the fact that many owners in the US are multinational corporations that need an international solution. So in the meantime, we're back to our equipment maintenance project on the top line. And as we developed the initial activity proposal, there were several other documents that are, and software even, that are currently in draft format. One is that lessons learned report that I mentioned. Another one was draft technical specification that's now been updated from version 1 to version 3, but has not been widely circulated for a proper review. Mainly what we wanted to do is simplify the existing basic handover MVD to be only the things that were necessary and common across projects, and to move it up to IFC 4.3. In addition, there's already a testing platform that can be adapted quite easily once we have the initial drafts of the candidate standard, which is going to be the result of this phase 1 project that we're currently soliciting your participation with. So that's a little bit of the timeline of the projects. Let's go to look at the specific deliverables that are going to be produced during phase 1. And it's quite aggressive, this schedule. The interesting thing is that most of the people involved in the project have already been thinking about these things for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. So we're going to quickly be able to execute on these things. The first is a lessons learned document. There's a draft of that already in place. The MVD and /IDS models will be made available. There's a spreadsheet mapping publication that will be completely vetted and checked against requirements of users, example files in a variety of different formats. There will also be important information about the application and use of the process-oriented delivery of this information through ISO 19650. This will be done by John Ford in the UK. Many of you know him. He was on the several recent UK BIM task force. There'll be an implementation guide talking about the variety of factors needed to implement this, so that you don't have every project to be just another pilot project. In other words, what is it going to be? What is it going to take to change the processes that collect the data? There will be a deployment guide and a national transition guide. So if you're using the original specification, the US national specification, and you're transitioning to this one, that guide will tell you what's different and what translates and what's being thrown away. Following the development of these documents, we're going to have a review And then we will release these documents as a final candidate standard. This will also have some initial demonstrations, and there is one software vendor that's already implemented part of this specification. So we're getting ready to go, and we need your help. The project is organized in this way. Jeff Follett at Building Smart International is the project manager. The people who are sponsors will sit on the project steering committee, the major sponsors. And then we have 3 teams, an outreach team that will focus on working with chapters, BSI chapters, specifically to support the implementation and identification of registered training providers, so that when we get past the candidate stage, we can already have people lined up to be ready to go to provide proper education and certification, as well as providing contract language, so that when someone, an owner says, I want X, Y, and Z delivered, the subcontractor doesn't say, well, it's not in our contract and we're not going to do it. The requirements team who's going to be doing the review is made up of several different subgroups, from owners all through product suppliers. And we think that software companies would be primarily interested in localization, although BSI chapter members will also be involved in the translation of the documents into their local language. I should say one important technical innovation that's happening is a defined list of allowed character sets. This is a really critical thing for internationalization, defining what symbols make up letters and alphanumeric characters and so forth, so that we don't have situations where software is exporting data that can't be used because the wrong symbology is used at a very low level. So this is an important thing that the localization team is going to address. And the technical team is headed by me, and we're thinking about things and have been for a long time about how to improve these national specifications and turn them into international standards. We have the budget here. You can pause and take a look at that. Most of the activity in the budget needs to be in there so that we can get a proper documented review and a technical edit of the materials that are being produced, so that we can truly say it's a high quality international standard. This is the expected cost of each of the individual work package items. You can take a look at that at your leisure if you want to pause this. Now, Building Smart International has an established process to create ISO-based international standards. And there's 3 phases: initiation, development, and approval. Let's talk about where we are on this project in the BSI standards process. So at this point, we have an approved activity proposal and a detailed project plan, and we have a few sponsors. We need additional sponsors, and we need more participants in the project. Once we get those, we will be able to go with the sponsors we already have and get approval for the full project through Building Smart International. Through our development phase, which occurs in this project, we will have a candidate standard. And again, if we get you to participate in the project, we can have an update to this specification in 12 months. So let's turn to sponsorship. So if you want to have a say in what goes on, we'd like you to sponsor the project. And the requirements for sponsorship are as follows. You have to be a member of a BSI chapter, or you could be a member of the international. There has to be a cash contribution, and I'll talk about the recommended minimums for that here in a moment. And you'll have to sign some paperwork that says you commit to providing some money and you're going to participate. And the participation is a 2-way NDA. I'll mention that in a moment. So what are the benefits? Major sponsors get to sit on the project steering committee. Participants get to sit on individual teams. Everyone that sponsors will have early access to everything so that they can begin implementing right away. And you will get public acknowledgement of your participation and leadership by sponsoring this project on our website that you can use in your marketing materials. Let's talk about phase 2 of the project. So a year after we start officially, we will get to software demonstrations and looking at what are the educational requirements needed to get people spun up on this new standard. We want software companies to help us look at the requirements and implementation guides and the example files. And from my 15 years of messing with the US national specification, I can tell you there's a little give and take there. So there might be also some additional modification to the technical documentation based on the feedback we receive by the people who actually implement it in their products. And that's good. We need that. And it's important for everybody to participate in order to get the best possible answer. In phase 3, we're going to be going to the BSI chapters. And as I said, really, your participation through a BSI chapter can begin right away by surveying your local members to find out what went wrong with COBE locally and figuring out how to change your contract language to properly enforce and push down the requirements through the subcontractors, even back into the product supply chain, into your suppliers and manufacturers. Ultimately, it's up to those folks to provide the proper data. We have this stumbling block of them not delivering in most situations actionable information. All they deliver is PDF files. So the extent that you can work with inside your region to make that happen, that will further improve the delivery and the quality of the data provided through FM Handover equipment maintenance project. So those are the 3 phases of the project. You know about participation and sponsorship, but I want to talk about something a little bit deeper here. And that's really what is being asked of anyone who's participating in this project. It's not that we want you to come to the project and talk about all the great things you're doing. What we want you to talk about is what's really going on, because what we know is going on is people are ham-fisting pump 3 is in room 5 over and over and over again, despite requirements for deliverables of US national specifications. We want to talk about what people have always done in the back office and how we can fix it. So the ask is really to talk about, let's be honest about what's going on and then fix it and do something real to fix it so that we can make a change that's actually a change instead of just buying some software and showing a presentation of, oh, doesn't it look great with the goggles? Now the goggle application may be great, or the robots laying out room floor lines may be great, and they probably are. But what I will tell you is anybody that's talking about 7D and aspirational visions of BIM is talking about a utopia that no one who actually has their fingers in the back office knows will ever happen. So we want you to be honest about what's really going on so that we can make a change to the process of the work and thereby capture the non-geometric data as we go. So we want you to help us make a real change. In order to do that, the process is that there's 2 agreements. There's a participation agreement and a sponsor agreement. The participation agreement basically is a 2-way NDA. You're familiar with that. That's very respectful of everyone's contribution to the project. And the time that you spend at the meetings is going to be respectfully considered. We have rules of order of our meetings to ensure that meetings do not get railroaded or taken over by 1 or 2 people with large opinions or loud voices. Everyone is going to have an opportunity to participate and help fix this problem. Now, for the sponsors, we recommend 2 minimum levels of sponsorship agreement, of cash contribution for sponsors. The first is we'd like every individual that's had a touch of this data and realized the value and also the current hurdles that have to be overcome. We would ask for your minimum contribution of the cost of 1 business trip, 1 week-long business trip somewhere where you have to travel, because you're spending that over and over and over again every time you have to go and adjudicate problems of people misunderstanding the scope or the process or the content required for the deliverables that you're having to produce. So think about the benefit and this small cost of your participation as an individual sponsor. Owners and companies we would like to sponsor at their expected value of this project on one building. Okay, so assume you have a campus of 200 buildings, and just think about the increased efficiency you would gain by having that 20% benefit to the maintenance worker that's going around your building on one project. Consider what that is, and that's what we would like your contribution to be, a value associated contribution. Now, let me ask you what our sponsors have said. The major sponsor to date is Statsbygg. That's the Norwegian public facility management organization. Some of you probably know Steen, the chief architect at that organization, who's leading the development of the Norwegian BIM requirements. They became a sponsor in the project to get access to early information, and then also to influence the outcome to make sure it had the content that was needed by their facility management and owner organization. They have not been able to implement a US specification because simply it's not an international standard. And despite attempts of the US to force an international standard, this is not the proper way. The proper way is through the Building Smart International, the owner of the ISO that is the basis for this whole project. So what does Statsbygg expect to get out of it? Well, one thing is that they're not going to have to invest a full set of investment. They can do a limited investment and allow their leverage on that investment to create a standard, where otherwise they would have to hire all of these people themselves and do an equivalent project. In fact, the Army paid $415,000 over 5 years in order to produce the original US national specification. This is not the kind of outlay that's necessary if you are trying to contribute to a project that's going to develop an international standard. Because it's an international standard, then many more software companies, not just the local companies responding to your local requirement, but international software companies would also respond and be available and have the capability to meet this specification. So what would Statsbygg say to you today if you were an owner or facility manager? It's clear. They want your help. They want you to provide your contribution and expertise to the project, because it's only through your contribution and expertise does this project become more than just a BIM in a shoebox at the end of a project. So Statsbygg, and as a sponsor, and myself as the former developer of the US national specification and the team leader for the technical team at BSI, we need your help on this project. Here's where you can go to get the forms filled out. Once you fill out this form, our project manager will come back to you with the participation and the sponsorship agreement for you to sign and send in so that we can get this project started. If you need to pause the presentation to get this website down, please do so. So I want to thank you for participating in this webinar today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact our project manager, Jeff Ollett, at the Gmail account shown there. You can certainly contact me to talk about any technical issues you'd like to talk about and lessons learned you have, or your participation on any of those user teams that we've discussed. And of course, all of the information, including this video, is available through the Building Smart org standards room, standards area, building room, and the FM Handover project. Thank you for joining me today.